We made it! MLB DFS has finally returned in classic format. We're just going to ignore the Korea series that occurred last year. Nobody really views those as regular season games. I know they count in the standings, but let's be real here. But long off season, an interesting off season, lots of movement, lots of pitching injuries as well. So this video, we're going to be breaking down the 8-game DraftKings slate, talking about builds, ownerships, strategies, kind of where we think it's all going to break down. But before we do get started, welcome to FSi DFS. I'm McKinley412. We're going to be bringing these videos to you all season long, Monday through Friday. It's going to be myself and Mega Ruler kind of alternating these videos. It's going to look a lot like this. We're going to talk about pitchers and stacks. We have a whole sheet here that we provide to our members in our Discord channel. We provide cores for FanDuel, Classic Cash, GPP. We do showdowns, weather, tiers, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to come join us, links are down in the description below. You can find our website. We can find our Discord. We'd love to have you join. Ask any questions about the slate. Let's just talk about baseball. I love baseball. Let's just hang out, have fun, and go through this marathon of a season together. So let's dive into the pitchers here. High salary tier, which honestly, not too much of a high salary in my opinion. No pitcher above 9.5K. This is opening day. This is all the teams like, number one ace pitchers. There's a lot of cheap guys. Glass now, he's not going to be sub 10K for long. Same with Lopez, same with Screwball for sure, possibly Reagan's. Luzardo is just way too cheap. I don't know what's going on there. But salary, not going to be too much of an issue here. Regardless, Screwball, Glass now, this is kind of like your 1A, 1B. I do have Screwball ranked ahead of Glass now. He's got a great matchup going up against the White Sox, who have a lot of holes in their lineup. They're going to be one of the worst teams in baseball. Not the worst team. I mean, you got some contenders, Oakland, Washington, Colorado for sure. But the White Sox are definitely going to be a lower tiered team and an offense that we're going to be picking on quite a bit. Screwball, absolutely elite pitcher when he is healthy. The main thing is, can he stay healthy? He's now had a full offseason of rehab and work, and I think he's good to go. Great spring training that he did have. He's stretched out. Screwball is going to be my number one pitcher on this slate, especially for cash games. Glass now, this is actually going to be his second start for the regular season. Like I mentioned earlier, he did pitch in the Korea series. Didn't look super great. He had a little bit of control issues with his walks. I think he had 4 or 5 walks, only 3 strikeouts across 4 or 5 innings. I'm not looking too deep into that, though. It was one start, and it was on the other side of the world. It was 3 a.m. LA time when those games were happening, and I know they were in Korea for a week or so beforehand, so not too much of. Maybe it didn't impact him too much, but again, I'm not looking too deep into that. Glass now, he's facing off against St. Louis. He's probably going to be in line for the win. Dodgers are always going to be, not always, but they're going to be heavy favorites throughout the course of the season, especially with the addition of Ohtani to their lineup in the offseason. Below them, also top salary tier, are Reagan's and Lopez. I don't know what to do with these guys. Both of them established veteran pitchers. I know Reagan's is still young, and even Lopez is still technically a bit young. But they just did not look great in spring. Lopez especially really struggled in spring. Every single start that he had, he was allowing multiple earned runs. Reagan's, he started off well, then kind of fumbled a little bit towards the end there. But Reagan's in the second half of last season was an absolute stud, one of the best pitchers in all of baseball. The hype train on Reagan's, if you play season-long MLB, the hype train on him was just chugging along at full speed. It was crazy. But Lopez was kind of also there. He was one of the top 7-8 pitchers that was consistently drafted throughout the course of the season. So these guys are established. They just struggled in spring. How much do you pay attention to spring stats this early on in the season? I don't know. There's no true cut answer to it. When people ask me this question in terms of pitching and spring training, I always bring up Clayton Kershaw in 2021. In that season, in 4 spring training starts, he had an ERA combined over 10. It was not good. It was really bad. But Clayton Kershaw was just trying new pitches. He was just kind of going through the motions, stretching out the arm, wasn't too concerned with everything. Because he followed up that spring training where he had an ERA over 10 with an April regular season, 6 starts, an ERA of 2. Most dominant pitcher in baseball. He had 3 shutouts. It was absurd. So yeah, so how much do you pay attention to spring training stats? If you think it means a lot, well then you're just going to throw Lopez out the door and you're going to be really interested in those Kansas City bats. Reagans, possibly them, and you're going to like the Minnesota bats, who are also very, very cheap. But if you don't pay attention to them, maybe you get a little bit of lower ownership on them just because people are going to be paying attention to those spring numbers. Whether you like it or not, they're going to be paying attention to them. And if they mean anything or not, they're going to be paying attention to them. So there is going to be lower ownership on Lopez and Reagans just because of that. So I think, in GPP, I don't mind them. Like, they've proven they can pitch in the majors with high strikeout rates, in decent-ish matchups as well. Going over to the mid-tier, and it's kind of like mid-tier. Luzardo, he's the cheapest of the bunch, but I do think that with his strikeout upside, he's going to be my top-ranked mid-tier guy. What's he at in the salary? 7.6K. So compared to Webb, 800 cheaper. It's fine. Nice matchup going up against Pittsburgh. But Pittsburgh, they were bombing the ball all spring training. They actually led the entire league in terms of home runs. Luzardo, he can allow the home run a little bit more often than your average MLB pitcher. Typical average MLB pitcher allows a home run per 9 at like a 1.1 clip. Luzardo is at like a 1.3, 1.4. So he allows a little bit more home runs than usual, but still, 7.6K, far too cheap for him. He's going to be 9K and above probably pretty soon. Logan Webb, I don't have any interest in him here, especially when you got guys like Keller, Darvish, Valdez right below him, and then Reagan's Scooball not too much higher above him in terms of salary. Logan Webb, he's a great ground ball pitcher, but man, when you talk about bad springs, he had the worst of the bunch. His ERA was over 10. Maybe he's pulling the 2021 Clayton Kershaw. I don't know. But yeah, he had an ERA over 10. He was the worst pitcher in spring training so far this year of, the elite pitchers that made it, or the strong veteran pitchers that have made it. So I don't really have any interest in him here. But maybe he's pulling the 2021 Clayton Kershaw on us, and he's just going to have a phenomenal start to the regular season. Darvish, Valdez, Keller, I really couldn't separate either of these 3 guys. They're all very similar priced. I ultimately broke it down Darvish, Valdez, Keller, or I could go Valdez, Darvish, Keller. I think Keller's the worst of the bunch. And it was mainly I was looking at park factor, I was looking at ownership, and I was looking at strikeout rates for these 3 guys. But really, I like this mid-tier quite a bit. Over into the cheap section, Crochet, the big surprise out of White Sox camp is he's the opening day starter for the White Sox. He's fully stretched out. He went 80 pitches in his final start, and he looked dominant. This is a first-round draft pick. I think he was like a top 10 overall draft pick back in 2020 or 2021. So he's got high pedigree. He's worked his way through the Myers, and he's looked dominant and elite through the course of the spring. How much do you pay attention to spring training? Who knows? This is gonna be the fun question that we ask throughout the course of at least the first week or so. But I do really like Crochet. 6.5K, very affordable, decentest matchup against Detroit. There's no snow games. I also want to talk about this here real quick. There's no snow games that we have to be worried about or concerned about. The coldest game that is on this slate is the Chicago or the Cincinnati games, which are in the mid-50s. It's not like in previous years where there were snow flurries flying around and games were getting postponed left and right. We somehow got a pretty decent weather-wise. I know half the slate's in a dome, but still, we got a pretty decent weather for an opening day contest. After Crochet, Berrios, Eflin, big upside, big lower floor for Berrios. Kind of same with Eflin as well. And then Gray and Montas, they're more GPP. I almost put these guys into the no interest fade category. And then Nicholas going up against the Dodgers, no. Cortez going up against Houston. He struggles with the fly ball. I'm just worried that Houston is just going to smack 3 home runs off of him, and they're going to put up 7 runs and break the slate. That's just my concern. So let's talk about some bats here. My favorite, well, the top bats are going to be the Dodgers. This is going to be no surprise. Like, slate in and slate out, it's probably going to be the Dodgers. Right behind them, though, is going to be Houston for me. Houston just up and down throughout their lineup, one of the best lineups in baseball. Facing off against Cortez. Again, Yankees, Garrett Cole, injured. So Cortez is kind of sliding into his spot there. But he struggles with the fly ball a lot. He doesn't induce many ground balls at all. And Houston's not really a team that you want to be facing if you do indeed struggle with that. They got some bombers, Tucker, Alvarez for sure. But they also have Jose Abreu and Pena. Who am I missing? Altuve, Bregman. Oh my gosh. Hey, it's the first day. Give me a little bit of a break. But I do think that Houston could be definitely in play. They're expensive, for sure. I mean, 3 guys above 5.5K, but it's not impossible to jam them in there. A guy like Pena at 3.4K, he could be a nice cheap guy you could have some interest in. Yanier Diaz, 3K. He's another cheap guy they can fill in with this Houston stack. There could be a lot of options on this slate for some wraparound stacks. I'll talk about some of those wraparound stacks I do have interest in as well. But yeah, it's going to be Dodgers. It's going to be Houston as like your favorite the 2 top offenses of the day. San Diego right behind them. And then I think there's a big gap. Not a big gap, but a gap. And then Tampa Bay. And I think there's also a gap in between Houston and San Diego. But San Diego, excuse me, they're going to be facing off against Logan Webb. And this is really comes down to how much do you trust spring stats. Webb looked awful. But last year, he was not a guy that you really ever wanted to stack against just because he induces so many ground balls. He has one of the best ground ball rates in all of baseball. But I do like San Diego here if Webb is continuing to struggle. Their pricing is much more affordable than the Dodgers and Houston brings you. They've already shown the capabilities of their offense as well. They didn't make a whole lot of changes, but they do have some solid additions from the offseason. Jackson Merrill, 3K. He's going to be their starting center fielder. He already started 2 games. He bats down in the lineup. He's probably going to be batting 8th or 9th, probably 9th, but maybe this is another wraparound stack. Like, this is an elite prospect for sure. And at 3K, he's too cheap. He's going to see his salary rise throughout the course of the season. GPP, I love the GPP possibilities for this slate just because we have so many pitchers who are like established veterans who have looked really shaky in spring. And then we have guys who look fairly shaky over the course of their career but looked great in spring. And it's like, what do you do? I love it. GPP is going to be fun early on in the season. But Cincinnati, they're going to be my favorite GPP team. They're going to be facing off against Gray. Let me pull up their team here. They're going to be facing off against Gray. Now, Gray, he has a great, strikeout upside to him, but he gets crushed with fly balls and ground balls as well. He's going to be pitching in that small Cincinnati ballpark. So I think that, these Cincinnati bats can certainly get there and light him up and put up a ton of runs. But also at the same time, I could see Gray being a really intriguing, cheap pitching option because Cincinnati strikes out so much. They have so many strikeouts throughout the course of their lineup. Ellie De La Cruz, I think I saw it was like 40 spring training at-bats, and he struck out in 17 of them. And I don't even think he was the worst, honestly. Like, it was bad. They strike out like crazy. So I like both sides of this, but if they can minimize the strikeouts, they have fantastic power in their lineup. You could go wraparound stacks like a guy like Benson. He's got stolen base upside. He's cheap. He's going to be batting down in the order. You could go Benson and then kind of go more towards the top of the lineup. You could put in a guy like Fraley, Candelario. He's over in Cincinnati now. Absolutely love that. Steer. And like if you do like a wraparound Cincinnati stack, you can pretty much get 2 top pitchers in here. Yeah, 3.7K remaining. Go cheap at catcher. entirely possible. Get a nice Cincinnati wraparound stack. Kansas City, they're another team that I think is really intriguing, and you can get a nice wraparound stack as well. You'd probably be wrapping it around with a guy like Isbell, 2.9K. He had a solid spring for sure. And again, Kansas City, they're facing off against Lopez, who every single spring start that he had like, I think it was like 4 or 5. He allowed multiple earned runs, and it just got worse and worse as the spring went on. But Isbell, like him there, and they just have so many guys. Melendez is one of my favorite value plays on the entire slate at 3.3K. If you're going to go with a Kansas City stack, you can't fade Bobby Witt. You got to have Bobby Witt in there. Pasquantino, he's going to be popular and a favorite of mine kind of throughout the course of the season. Perez, go big with the Kansas City stack if you truly think that Lopez is really going to struggle. Or again, maybe he pulls the 21 Clayton Kershaw. Remains to be seen, but you can get a nice Kansas City stack in there. Pittsburgh, already talked about how, or I think I talked about it, Pittsburgh led the majors in home runs hit over the course of spring. They hit over 50 home runs as a team. They were awesome. They were, they were bombing out, but they were also hitting for average as well, and they have stolen base upside to them. O'Neill Cruz, Suwinski. Suwinski's going to be a cheap outfielder that you could possibly go, who's probably going to be batting 4th in that lineup. So I'm really excited on Pittsburgh's possibility. They're probably not going to see a lot of ownership either, because I do think a lot of people are going to be gravitating towards Luzardo just because he's probably the most mispriced pitcher on the slate, or he is the most mispriced pitcher on the slate. So he's going to see some ownership because he's just dirt cheap, and it allows you to get those LA Dodgers and Houston bats. So maybe Pittsburgh could be that nice team that has the power potential who's going up against a popular pitcher. Toronto, they were just lights out in spring. That's strictly it. They were just absolutely lights out and stay at the top of the lineup with them. Cheap guys, Minnesota. This is probably going to be the last team I'm going to be talking about. But Minnesota facing off against Cole Reagans. They just have a lot of cheap guys. Julian, for sure. Royce Lewis. Nobody above 5K. Only 3 guys above 3.9. You should not have any issues. Even if you just want to do some one-offs with Minnesota here, I don't mind that at all. I'm just going to want to keep talking, but I want to keep talking. This video's long enough already. But San Francisco, they did add Young-Ho Lee. He's probably going to be starting leadoff for San Francisco, but think of him as kind of like a Luis Arias. He's going to hit for great batting average, but his home run upside potential is very minimal. Doesn't really steal a lot of bases at all, so I do think he's a bit overpriced. But San Francisco, they've revamped their offense quite a bit. Kind of excited about them throughout the course of this season. So not a whole lot of other bats that I do want to talk about. Detroit, they might have Colt Keith. He's another cheap, high prospect. He's like the number 2 prospect in their organization. One of the higher prospects in baseball, who's going to be probably starting in that opening day lineup. He's 3K. He's a cheap guy that you could be going and plugging into your lineup, even if it's just a one-off at that point. But yeah, I mean, that kind of wraps up this slate. I think it's really intriguing for GPP. These are the rankings once again. They might shuffle a little bit before opening day. I'm recording this 2 days beforehand, so it might shake up a little bit. But again, come join us. Links down in the description below. If you don't want to do that, at least just hit that subscribe button. It really does help us out. So good luck in your contests. Thanks for watching. I wish you all the best of luck throughout the course of this season. And yeah, we'll see you tomorrow for the next one.